So, Jai Hind everyone. In our lecture series today, we are privileged to have Brig Manoj Mohan with us, and he will be speaking on a very topical point, which has become more important post Pahalgam and Operation Sindoor. If you remember the sequence of events after Pahalgam happened, initially the government went into a lot of non-direct war actions, which also included, reducing the embassy staff and, certain restrictions on some trade and a whole lot of things, including that, they had decided that the no water from Indus will be given in compliance with Indus Water Treaty. That the treaty was not cancelled, but it has been held in abeyance. Before this happened, there were a lot of issues actually already progressing as far as Indus Water Treaty is concerned. Was signed long time back. The realities then and realities now have undergone a change. So India wanted to renegotiate that treaty based on the current realities, even if the parameters are old. But Pakistan was not coming on board, and because of that, the certain unilateral actions as perceived by Pakistan were taken by India in terms of the construction of dams and things like that. Why Pakistan did not come on board? Because it was heavily biased in Pakistan's favor as against its legitimate right. And if you really see, we may not have currently the capability to leverage the water because of the lack of infrastructure. And when this was declared, after that the race started. So as of now, it hasn't had that kind of effect also in Pakistan to that extent. But as the time passes by, and we also start working something on the infrastructure, and we decide to go seriously about it, there will be a lot of challenges. So we are very fortunate that we'll be hearing somebody who will be speaking on the various nuances of Indus Water Treaty, what is going, what is the way forward, what could be the further possibilities, and then thereafter you can have your queries, and those things can be clarified. And anyone who is interested in water agreements or the water wars or the issues between the lower riparian and upper riparian states, that is and the subject of writing your articles and doing your research, because water is going to be the most important thing in coming days besides the environment. So with that, Manoj, I will request Dr. Ulpi to brief you, the audience, and then we'll start.
Thank you, sir, for joining us. Brigadier Manoj Mohan was commissioned into the Sikh Regiment in 1986. He has a wide-ranging experience spread across the entire spectrum of activities in the army. He saw live action very early in his service while serving with the Indian peacekeeping force in Sri Lanka, where he was grievously wounded. The brigadier has thereafter served in Operation Rakshak, Operation Parakram, and Operation Orchid in J&K as well as Nagaland. A graduate of prestigious Defence Services Staff College, Wellington, he has held various command, staff, and instructional appointments, including one at Army Headquarters and 2 command headquarters. He has been an instructor at Officers Training Academy and Infantry School. The officer has commanded his parent battalion in Gurez sector in a remote part of J&K and later a brigade in the deserts. For his distinguished service, he has been awarded the Chief of Army Staff Commendation twice. He is an avid writer and contributes to various professional journals. Presently, he is engaged as the executive director in a security company. I hand over to you.
Alius.
Thank you, Dr. Lupi, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I consider it to be a privilege to be here in a leading think tank of the country, the Center for Joint Warfare Studies. And I'm grateful to the DG, Ashok, and the DDG, Brigadier Ranjeev, for giving me this opportunity to be here And I must confess at the beginning that this being my first opportunity of an engagement with a think tank, I come here with some amount of trepidation. Hopefully, I'll do justice to the topic that has been given to me. If you look at the topic itself, it says water, power, and strategy. Water itself is a very benign subject, and to associate itself with power and strategy seems a little awkward. However, such is the importance of this, and such has been the impact of this particular commodity that it willy-nilly gets associated with power and strategy. We are also discussing in particular about the future of Indus Waters Treaty, which we all know that has gained significance, as the DG just alluded to, in recent times, especially post Pahalgam. Now, if you look at this Indus River, with its origin in the upper reaches of Tibet, flows downwards and has 5 tributaries. That is the Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Satluj. And this is a major river system which flows through various countries and is a source of sustenance for the population which depends on this. Now, if you come to the historic, little bit of a history on this, the dark red line that you see is the international boundary between India and Pakistan. And the dotted lines above that is the line of control. Since 1942, it was quite evident that India is going to gain independence, and partition was also looming large. And therefore, it is a bit surprising that the delineation of the boundary itself was done with just about 5 weeks' time given to Sir Cyril Ratcliffe, who was brought into picture to delineate this boundary without, he by profession was an attorney and had no experience in cartography. He didn't even know where is Punjab and where is Bengal. And he was tasked to draw this line. Now, if you take your attention to this line again, this line cuts across the Indus River system and virtually divides the geography on either side. But water is not contained by geography, water flows through. And therefore, the origin of this issue from this part. If you take your attention to the right part of the map, which is there, this basically gives you the idea of the various headworks, dams, and hydroelectric projects, which both the countries have constructed based on this river system. Now, coming into the historical perspective, initially when the partition took place, and as I said, the manner in which the partition took place, there was a standstill agreement which was signed. This agreement was very time specific. It was only valid till 31st of March 1948. And it was supposed to, it was conceived or understood that by this time, some kind of an arrangement will be worked out between both the nations to how to share this water resource. On 1st April 48, when this standstill agreement expired, at least Pakistan was taken by surprise, and suddenly it was standing aghast because there was no further agreement and India has switched off the headworks which were in Madhopur and Firozpur. Thereafter, Inter-Dominion Accord was signed in the month of May 1948, wherein water was supposed to be released to Pakistan against annual payment. Once again, it was understood that this is a temporary arrangement because this may not last long, a payment against supply of water. And therefore, the negotiations had to be carried out to work out something more formal and final. In 1951, Sir David Lilienthal, who was the chair of the Tennessee Valley Authority earlier, also again attorney by profession, but by virtue of his appointment with the Tennessee Valley Authority, he had a fair amount of knowledge about water resources, how to manage them, how to distribute, and how to carry out their management. He was on a tour to this region, and he felt that a formal treaty is necessary to work out arrangement, which will not only merely deal with water sharing, but also deal with the security situation, which may help. And he also sought the involvement of the World Bank into this. From 51 to 54, the negotiations went on. Our experts, initially the delegation which went was led by Mr. N. Khosla, Yudhiyanath Khosla. I'm naming him because I'll give a quote of his a little later, which was relevant to this, how this treaty was conceived. And the delegations met in Washington number of times, but there were far too many disagreements and there was no consensus which was emerging. In 54, World Bank chairman then, World Bank president then, Mr. Eugene Black, he suggested this formula of distribution of, or the sharing of the waters. So 3 rivers going to India, 3 rivers going to Pakistan, but yet there were objections from both sides. Obviously, India quoted a higher population, bigger landmass that was available. Pakistan gave its reasoning that this is the only sustenance means of sustenance for them. And therefore, again, there was no agreement as such. However, there was some amount of agreement which came about for this basic formula of dividing 3 rivers each. The nuances still had to be worked out. Finally, in 1960, the consensus emerged, and on September 19th, this treaty was signed in Karachi, wherein our then Prime Minister, Mr. Nehru, and on Pakistani side, the President, Mr. Ayub Khan, signed this treaty, which World Bank standing as a guarantor. Now, this is important. There was no third party in this. World Bank only was a guarantor of this, or a facilitator. There was also a development fund agreement which was signed by a consortium of nations which had agreed to fund the canal and the dam construction which are going to follow. This was about $900 million worth of fund, and India's contribution about $174 million in this. So this was also worked out so that it goes on smoothly. If you look at the geostrategic significance, this treaty, as I said earlier, was not being looked upon only as a water sharing arrangement. It was also being seen as, given the kind of bloodshed which had happened during partition and the animosity which was prevailing preceding the years of partition, it was understood that this area is very important and this treaty must help in achieving peace in this region. And therefore, there was a geostrategic significance of this. As far as sharing of water itself is concerned, the DG also alluded to earlier. If you look at this figures, about 39% of the water went to India, 47% to Pakistan, and 8% each, 8% and 6% respectively to China and Afghanistan. In terms of water share, it is much more clearer, which I'll come to a little later. Then there are other riparian states as well in the context of India, China, Bangladesh, Nepal, with whom we have, with some of them, we have the water sharing agreement. We have with Bangladesh, the Ganga Water Treaty, which is again due for renewal next year in 2026. With Nepal, the Kosi flows down from there. And with China, Brahmaputra, which is flowing down from China to in our territory. Headworks, as I mentioned earlier, both the headworks, important ones, were in India. And therefore, somehow, the control of these waters remained with India, which was a cause of unease as far as Pakistan was concerned. It was also considered to be a diplomatic tool for maintaining good neighborly relations and peace in the region. Because the way partition had taken place and the immediate events that followed had made it very clear that this relation between India and Pakistan is going to be anything but normal. Now, if we come to the treaty structure proper, what did this treaty envisage? What it contained? 3 eastern rivers, that is the Ravi, Bias, and Satluj, exclusive rights were given to Pakistan. And it was for all purposes, irrigation, drinking water, and so on and so forth. Eastern rivers with India, wherein they were, while the exclusive right was with India, it could do all kind of activities with this, including hydroelectric projects. The western rivers which went to Pakistan, that is the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, though Pakistan had exclusive right on it, but it had a caveat that there was certain restricted usage which was allowed for India, including construction of hydroelectric projects, but with the condition that it has to be run-of-the-river projects. You cannot construct dams over it. One out of 168 million acre feet of water which was to be distributed, 135 went to Pakistan and 33 to India. So here the ratio comes almost 80-20. That is the distribution of water that was done. The treaty itself had a permanent Indus Water Commission. Now this was to be staffed from both the sides, experts from both the sides of India and Pakistan. And this was meant to deal with regular inspections, dealing with minor grievances which may come up, differences which may crop up, technical designs, and so on. And it was supposed to meet from time to time with both countries agreeing to it. It also had a three-stage dispute redressal mechanism, wherein the first one was the Permanent Indus Commission, as I said earlier, and thereafter it also catered for a neutral expert and a permanent arbitration panel, which will deal with the differences which may crop up and cannot be resolved by the first two mechanisms. We had an arbitration. Interestingly, this treaty did not have an exit clause. Now, this is important to keep in mind when we discuss the way forward and what options does India have, what options does Pakistan have. Now, just to give you the idea of how, taking what DG also mentioned, that how generous this treaty was towards Pakistan, just an excerpt from the letter written by Mr. N. Khosla, who was the head of the delegation, and he wrote this on behalf of the Government of India. And I quote, he said, the proposal requires India to give up the use of a large part of the water flowing through her own territory, and thus to abandon for all time any hope of the development of a considerable portion of the extensive arid lands in India, which has no possible source of water supply other than the Indus system of rivers, and which will therefore remain a desert forever. And that as such, the sacrifices that India is being called upon to make are extremely heavy and constitute a serious blow to the economic development of this region. Nevertheless, in the interest of a speedy and constructive settlement, and in the spirit of goodwill and friendship that has guided my government ever since the beginning of this controversy, we accept the principles of the bank proposal as the basis of agreement. Now, in this, I'd just like to draw your attention to the word spirit of goodwill and friendship. We'll allude to it once again once we go forward. Now, we know the kind of relationship that India and Pakistan have had for last over 7 decades. Yet, somehow, this treaty has withstood the test of time. How did that happen? It appears to be quite illogical, yet this treaty has survived. Now, if we, in my assessment, after the end of Second World War, and the colonial rule, which was slowly coming to an end across the globe, there was a period of consolidation, and people in general wanted to avoid confrontation. That was one factor. The United Nations had already replaced the League of Nations. World Bank and other international bodies had come up as arbiters for bilateral or multilateral dispute settlement. And it had agreement by most of the countries of the world. This was also the only cross-border water sharing treaty in Asia. There are no such treaties, there are no such precedents in Asia at least. Worldwide, there were, but in Asia, this was the only one. It was quite generous towards Pakistan, which was the lower riparian state with almost 80% of the share. There was a lot of technical clarity in this treaty. The ambiguities were very less. It had an institutional strength because it provided for inherent dispute redressals, didn't have to refer to anyone else, and it had multi-layered system to deal with certain situations that may arise. It also passed the crisis test during 1965 and 71 wars, and in a limited context, the Kargil War. Nobody talked about this treaty. It never came into question. It was still surviving. So there was innate strength in this treaty. India was very generous. There's no doubt. I showed you the quotation, how we gave this water to Pakistan, understanding the requirements of a lower riparian state. We never invoked this renegotiation clause initially. For first almost, we'll say almost 6 decades, we never talked about it. Pakistan also understood the criticality of this. And there was a very, very responsible behavior on part of India. And these are probably the reasons why it withstood the test of time and continued in spite of the fraught relationship that both the countries had. But it did not mean that everything was fine. Water was already emerging as a source of conflict, and it was being recognized worldwide. And if you look at this quotation by the Secretary General, erstwhile Secretary General of United Nations, Boutros Ghali, he said the next war will be fought over water, not politics. Similarly, we had another quote, if this century's wars were over oil, the next centuries will be over water, unless we change how we manage this precious and vital resource. Another former Secretary General of UN, Ban Ki-moon, a lack of water resource could lead to more conflicts in the future. So it was quite clear that the world was seized of this matter, and water is going to emerge as a possible source of conflict worldwide. Now, in the case of Indus water, if you look at the stressors, how we have reached this situation, these stressors could be put in two parts. One is the natural or the technical, and the second is the political or the geopolitical issues which may crop up. Natural issues, this Indus water basin, river basin, is home to about 260 to 70 million people who are surviving on this water. This is also situated at a hydrologically very fragile location, this entire basin. Any change in the flow of water in any fashion will likely to affect the marine ecosystem that is sustained by the Indus water. This is also the world's second most stressed underground water reserve after Middle East and North Africa. They are the most stressed underwater reserve, and we are the second ones. The glaciers have been shrinking, and the snow cover has almost gone down by 23% over the last couple of years. Any change in the water quality and a potential saltwater intrusion into it would damage the croplands which are there at the mouth of this river basin, especially in Pakistan. The treaty was designed when the Himalayan glaciers were more stable. Climate change was almost unheard of, and populations were far, far smaller. So therefore, at that point in time, this treaty was relevant and contemporary to its time. But as we have gone forward 6 to 7 decades, a lot of realities on ground have changed. It had a very rigid framework. It never accounted for climate change, which was a foreseen possibility, not talked about, but foreseen, or erratic patterns of weather, rainfalls or flood, or prolonged droughts, which are likely to happen in this region. And of course, the ever increasing demand from the population, which would grow and has now, in this case, grown almost 4 times from what it was in 1960. If we come to the other stressors, the treaty was signed in 1960, and the first dispute which arose was on Salal Dam in 1978, which, with the intervention of the bilateral negotiations and the inherent treaty mechanism, was resolved and sorted out. Later on in 2005, the Baglihar Dam dispute was taken to the neutral expert. They had to be involved because the PIC could not resolve this matter. The ruling favored India. In 2013, once again, the dispute started in 2008, but finally the Court of Arbitration ruled in India's favor in 2013 in case of the Kishan Ganga project, which was on Kishan Ganga River on our side, Neelam on their side. This project is still going on. India has done a lot of work on this. So this was another issue which cropped up. Essentially, Pakistan has always been raising objection to the design of the dams which are being constructed or the hydroelectric projects which are being constructed. Later on, in 23, before that 2016, after the Uri attack, India had for the first time asked for full utilization of the eastern rivers. Though it was enshrined in the treaty, but once you make an emphatic statement about it, it is understood that you are going beyond the treaty provisions and you want to convey a message. 2019, after the Pulwama attack also, similar thing had happened when we sought the renegotiation. In 23, India issued a notice, formal notice for renegotiation, citing climate changes, changing security situation, and so on. Pakistan didn't agree to it, and reasons we all know for that. Finally, in 25, after the Pahalgam incident, this treaty, India put it in abeyance. Pahalgam was a one of its kind event. This is not merely a terror event that happened. It was a very strategically thought out event that Pakistan had planned for various reasons. So therefore, once Pahalgam happened, there are a slew of measures the government of India announced, including the suspension of defense attaches were to be recalled, Atari Wagah border was closed, and so on and so forth. A lot of diplomatic means was taken. But what took everyone was surprised was the announcement of holding the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance, because this happened for the first time. And this had the attention of the world. On 23rd of April, after the Cabinet Committee of Security meeting, this is the statement, this is the part of the statement issued by the Indian Foreign Secretary, which said the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960 will be held in abeyance with immediate effect until Pakistan credibly and irrevocably abjures its support for cross-border terrorism. So this was also the first time when we very directly and overtly linked this treaty to the cross-border terrorism and the security situation which was prevailing, and holding Pakistan squarely responsible for this. Immediately after that, a formal communication was given to Pakistan by the Secretary Water Resources, Government of India, who said that the obligation to honor a treaty in good faith is fundamental to a treaty. However, what we have seen instead is sustained cross-border terrorism by Pakistan targeting the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So here again, I'll draw your attention to what was given in Mr. A.N. Khosla's letter about the good spirit and good faith in which this treaty was signed. And this is what India highlighted, that this is what is now under threat. So if the spirit of goodwill and faith does not exist, it is difficult for India to continue with this treaty, and we are holding it in abeyance. Let's see what the Pakistan reaction was. It was on the expected lines, and Pakistan reacted as violently as it could. But they had a reason for that. This Indus Basin, it sustains the world's largest contiguous irrigation system on both sides and supports nearly 90% of Pakistan's food production. So we can understand the impact of it in Pakistan, wherein the agriculture contributes about 25% of the Pakistan GDP and accounts for 37% of their total employment. So obviously, it was a very, very important issue for them, and therefore they called it an act of war. And this is in public domain. The entire leadership, right from the Prime Minister to the all-powerful Chief of Army Staff, called it an act of war. India holding the treaty in abeyance. Even if it sounded rhetorical, it was expected that this will happen. Pakistan, as usual, was also playing to the gallery in order to draw the global attention that they always do. And this was yet another chance for them to show India in poor light, that India is moving away from a well-established and a functional treaty. If I exaggerate a bit, and some of the analysts have also written about it, that this water or this abrogation almost threatens the very existence of Pakistan and does cross a red line. Pakistan tries to internationalize this issue as always, and this was yet another opportunity to bring Kashmir into center stage, which was slowly and slowly receding into the background, given the normalcy which was coming back post the abrogation of Article 370. So therefore, what are the options that Pakistan had? Now, Pakistan, initially to start with, had the option of invoking the treaty clauses which were there, the three-stage dispute redressal mechanism. But given the kind of permanent freeze in which the relationship between these two countries was, it was very difficult that this mechanism will work. And therefore, what other options did they have? As they publicly articulated, they said, we'll take this matter to the International Court of Justice. Now, as far as the International Court of Justice is concerned, the counter-argument that India had, while accepting the jurisdiction of International Court of Justice, India had made a declaration in September 2019 under one of the articles of the ICJ, accepting the court's compulsory jurisdiction with certain crucial reservations. There are 13 of these exceptions which were given while accepting the jurisdiction of ICJ. And on number 3 was that it excludes disputes with any state which is or has been a member of the Commonwealth Nations. Now, it's quite clear why we included this. Pakistan happens to be a member of the Commonwealth Nation. The 5th item of this exclusion was, which is given on the second bullet, is related to or connected with facts or situation of hostilities, armed conflicts, individual or collective actions taken in self-defense, resistance to aggression, or fulfillment of obligations imposed by international bodies. So therefore, it also linked it to the security situation. And therefore, given this stand that India had already declared, it is unlikely that this matter will ever reach or be adjudicated by International Court of Justice, because it mandates that both the parties have to be willing to accept the jurisdiction. Next, but before I come to the next one, there is an interesting precedence in this. Kapchikago-Nagyamaros project between Hungary and Slovakia, erstwhile Czech Republic. Now, this was a dam which was being constructed. Treaty was signed in 1977 in Budapest, and the water was to be shared between Hungary and then Czech Republic. However, given the kind of, it was somehow designed quite similar to the Indus Treaty, wherein we were the benevolent partners. In that case, Hungary was the benevolent partner, and more water was being given. The cost of construction itself, what the share that came to Hungary, there was a lot of public outcry against this. And Hungary put this treaty into suspension, which was, of course, not accepted by Czechoslovakia. In the meantime, they moved on to something, a variation of this treaty called Variant C, which they started construction of their own dam. And later on, when Slovakia came into existence, they had a lot of talks between Hungary and Slovakia, but could not resolve this dispute. Went to International Court of Justice, which ruled that this none of these countries can abrogate or move out of this treaty. And that is the significance, and you can relate it to Indus Water in terms of what options are available with India. So this is the precedence as far as the International Court of Justice is concerned. The next option for Pakistan was to take this matter to UN Security Council. And for good reason, because Pakistan happens to be a member of the Security Council at this moment, the rotational membership which is there. And it also has short support from a veto-wielding all-weather friend called China. So if this matter ever goes to the UN Security Council, India had in September 21 made a statement in UN Security Council during a dispute on yet another transboundary river agreement, that India's principled position is that, as a general rule, transboundary water issues do not belong to the domain of the UN Security Council. This debate was pertaining to the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam, which was constructed between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt were other partners. Ethiopia was the higher riparian state, and Sudan and Egypt were the lower riparian state. It was on Blue Nile. So during this discussion which took place in UN Security Council, this was the stated position of India. So this is, as and when this matter reaches, this is likely to be India's stand as far as UN Security Council is concerned. Now let's see certain legal issues related to this treaty. This is an international treaty, goes without saying, with World Bank as a guarantor. As we saw earlier, there is no exit clause in this treaty. So there is no way you can exit this treaty except for renegotiating and replacing with a new treaty itself. It had an inherent three-tier dispute mechanism. We talked about it earlier. Then there are certain conventions which are governing the treaties related to water. One amongst them is the Helsinki Convention on the protection and use of transboundary water courses and international lakes. This is for ensuring sustainable and peaceful management of shared water resources, preventing conflicts, and ensuring water quality and quantity. So this is a framework which is available for managing the trans-border water resources. Then we have a UN Watercourse Convention, which was conceived in 1997 and finally ratified after ratification by most of the member countries in 2014, with similar objectives as given in the Helsinki Convention. Then there is a Sustainable Development Goal. 6.5.2 emphasizes the need for cooperative framework to manage shared water system. Now, what emerges in this, all these frameworks that you're seeing, is that water as a means of sustenance of life is given the due importance. So therefore, it has to be kept at the back of mind when we come to the options available to India. Apart from this, there are numerous regional and basin level agreements, transboundary, some of them I alluded to earlier. Now, India's decision to hold it in abeyance. It's a very interesting term that has been coined. Firstly, we must keep in mind that there is no such term given in the treaty itself. There's nothing called abeyance in this. So therefore, this was a very careful articulation by India why this particular term was used. Yeah. So this is one of the legal expert from Cambridge. Suspension is a formal legal measure governed by international law. Abeyance, by contrast, is a tool of strategic ambiguity It freezes the operational mechanics of the treaty without triggering its collapse. So now you see why India has selected this particular term of abeyance, because suspension would have attracted international opprobrium. Whole world would have been asking you questions, whereas holding it in abeyance, it is a strategic move. But having seen this, and as we will see after this, the other conventions which are there, legally speaking, it's a very, very gray area on which we are trading. There is this Vienna Convention on Laws of Treaty. This is supposed to be a mother convention which governs how treaties are to be designed, operated, managed, suspended, abrogated. Everything is contained in this treaty, which was signed in 1969 and is the primary legal framework governing creation, interpretation, and termination of treaties between states. This sets out the rules regarding how treaties should be conducted, amended, or dissolved. Some of the key provisions, if we see, first of all, it defines what is a treaty. And it says an international agreement concluded between states in written form and governed by international law. The Indus Waters Treaty very squarely falls into this definition. Then Article 60 to 62 talks about the termination or suspension of a treaty under conditions of material breach, impossibility, and fundamental change. The material breach is something which, as normal experts have or the analysts have talked about, should pertain to the treaty itself. Also, India has not mentioned this particular word, material breach, when we have talked about holding the treaty in abeyance. Impossibility doesn't come into the picture because the treaty is running, water is flowing, so there is no cause for impossibility. Fundamental change is something that India can always ask for because of the changing security situation. This is how well it will be taken. Legally, whether it will be accepted, it's a gray area, it's a question mark. But fundamental change is something that under Vienna Convention, we can always quote this and cite this when we move to our next step that we need to take. Now, as I had initially said, geopolitical significance of this treaty, the moment India uttered this word called abeyance, there were immediate regional and global concerns on this, and for right reasons. The geopolitical tension which will emerge, India and Pakistan are as one of the most volatile regions in the entire world, and that is how the entire world looks at it. The regional stability is also likely to be threatened because in Indus water system, we talked about two other countries. Initially, we only talk about in the context of India, Pakistan. However, there are other countries which are involved, notably China and Afghanistan. And how they have come into the picture, that post the Taliban regime's somewhat normalization of relation that India is establishing, and post the visit of two of the ministers, India has offered to construct a dam on Kunar River in Afghanistan. Now, Kunar interestingly flows into Kabul River, which further flows into Khyber Pakhtunkhwa of Pakistan. So certain amount of irrigation is also done by that river, and India has offered to construct a dam on that. Similarly, China has offered to expedite construction of Mohan Dam in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa area of Pakistan. So this regional dynamics also starts playing into this. As we had said earlier, it's not merely a water sharing agreement. It was one of those rare avenues of cooperation in a region which is otherwise beset with hostility. And it had, as we saw earlier, it has stood the test of time. Hydrohegemony was a term coined by a few of the analysts earlier, and Pakistan termed it as a water terrorism when we talked about holding Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. It is also being seen as shift in foreign policy of India. We have been very, very cautious earlier on as far as our foreign policy articulation has been. Whereas in this case, we are very, very emphatic in understanding, knowing fully well what the impact of this water is. Yet we have gone about saying that we can hold this treaty in abeyance. If we look at the broader picture, it also challenges the importance of agreement if we ever move out of it. The sanctity itself of agreement signed between various nations, either bilaterally or multilaterally. It also impacts the biodiversity and ecosystem. If you affect the flow of water, if you control the flow of water, alter the flow of water, it is going to affect the ecosystem, certainly, which is in any case very fragile. And therefore, there are far-reaching consequences beyond the immediate conflict between India and Pakistan. And then comes the China factor. One, I have already alluded to how it is helping Pakistan. Other is that as compared to Pakistan, we are the higher riparian state. Compared to India, China is the higher riparian state, and the Brahmaputra, which is the Sangpo River on their side, flows into our area. China already has constructed a number of dams and presently has already announced construction of a major dam on this particular river. How it is going to impact? The experts feel that impact will not be as bad as the Indus water abrogation will be on Pakistan. Yet it will affect, given what Brahmaputra does almost every year, the kind of havoc that it wreaks on northeastern states, particularly in Assam. So therefore, what is the way forward? Now, if we just look at it as movement forward on the treaty renegotiation clauses and how it suits both the countries, then the first aspect is to discuss these matters through the Permanent Indus Commission. A method already enshrined in the treaty and has been working fairly well earlier, so we can immediately engage through the Indus Water Commission. Also, when I talk of international mediation, we very well know India's stand on a third-party mediation. We don't accept it. However, since World Bank was already a guarantor of this treaty, either World Bank or any such impartial body which is there could help in brokering renegotiation of this treaty. Provisions of climate resilience, sustainability, and IWT provisions is crucial for adapting into contemporary challenges. So therefore, this treaty needs modernization, some of the challenges we talked about earlier when we were looking at these stresses. A broader framework may be designed involving more stakeholders so that it becomes a little more broad-based. And the water data sharing can be enhanced because this is a very, very important component of this treaty, sharing of the data, because this affects the flood control measures and also the irrigation measures that are going to be adopted. There are certain international legal standards which can be incorporated into it. We talked about various conventions which govern the treaties. There is also an opinion that we can shift from the volume to benefit sharing. Now here we were talking about water in terms of volume, 135 to them, 33 to us. So it's only talking about how much water will go. But what that water is going to do, ultimately, the cultivation, irrigation, drinking water, all those things, if we look at benefit, probably the treaty may be a little more better in its shape. There is also an opinion about sub-basin level agreements rather than having a singular approach, because that may make it relevant and can account for the diverse communities and hydraulic there. Ecological perspectives, goes without saying, it needs to be factored in. Recognition of climate change, how the glaciers are melting, the water flow itself is getting impacted, and a holistic response integrating geostrategy with geoecology. Some amount of security concerns need to be built into it so that this treaty remains immune to any further damage. So this is a way forward if situations are normal. Now, between India and Pakistan, situations have never remained normal. At the best of times, we are bad. So even in this case, when India has talked of abrogation or holding it in abeyance, it is not merely because there are some technical issues with the treaty. Our concerns are very different. That it is because of the security issue related and because of the support to cross-border terrorism that Pakistan does and has been consistently providing. So therefore, this is one option if everything moves normally. Otherwise, what else can we do? Can we treat it as a strategic tool for coercion? Can it be done? There are various examples. Very recently, we have had tariffs being used as a tool of coercion, not only against one or two countries, but almost against entire globe. We have had energy supplies being, this is a photograph of the Nord Stream 2 between Russia and Europe, which is almost the lifeline for Europe in terms of energy supply, the gas pipeline, and the sea lines of communication. If you take your mind back to what happened in after the attack on Iran's nuclear facilities by Israel, Iran had threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, almost 30% of the oil and the gas passes through this on a daily basis. One can understand the impact of the closure of Strait of Hormuz, but that has not prevented any of these people from using it as a tool of coercion. Is that an option available with us? Well, that is something that needs to be analyzed and seen, examined by the policymakers. This can always be held as a threat in being. A threat in being is something, a resource that you hold, you show it, don't use it, but you use it only for changing of the behavior. I've used the term, instead of coercion, I've said compellence. Whereas deterrence prevents any action from being taken, compellence is aimed at change of behavior. And that is what we are looking at by holding Indus Waters Treaty in front of Pakistan. Proactiveness on part of India in utilizing the allocated water resource. Whatever is allocated to us, the eastern rivers which come to us, we have not been utilizing 100% of our water which is there with us because we do not have adequate storage capability on that. Sharing of the flood data, we can always hold it back. This itself will create a lot of turbulence on the other side of the border. Storage on the western rivers. We are supposed to, we are permitted to construct hydroelectric projects on the western rivers. So far, we have made some, but we can always expedite this process. Flushing and desilting, which has already started. This itself is going to create havoc because for almost 30-40 years, no desilting has been done in this entire basin. So if the desilting is done, the storage capacity automatically increases. Construction of dams or not will take time, but desilting itself will have a major impact. The method of tour by Pak delegation periodically or Indian delegation moving to Pakistan, that can be put on hold, which has already been put on hold. Use of pressure tactics in case of escalation. Any escalation, the Prime Minister has already declared that any act of terror will be treated as an act of war and will hold not only the terrorists, but also the sponsors responsible for this and internationalize Pakistan's violation. So these are the strategic tools that are available to us, how we can use this treaty going forward. Now, coming to the end, going by the legal slippery ground on which we are, going by the conventions and going by how the world looks at it, any abrogation of a treaty which concerns water, which is a source of sustenance of life, is not going to be viewed very favorably by the world at large. And therefore, we have to tread very cautiously. And as I said, very intelligently, India has used the word abeyance. But then going forward, this abeyance has to be translated into action. Some activity, some action has to be taken to ensure that the message is given home. And as I look at it, this treaty certainly needs renegotiation under new terms of references. That is one step that we need to do. We also need to get the technical issues sorted out. We also need certain amount of guarantee for security to be inbuilt into this treaty. Given the relationship that is there between India and Pakistan, it is essential. And lastly, we need to incorporate the other stakeholders in this. In case it becomes a broad-based, in case it becomes a treaty which incorporates other rivers and other states in Southeast Asia, probably the longevity will be more and it may last longer. Because merely holding it as a threat against Pakistan comes with its own cost, and we have to factor that. That's all that I had.